Welcome back to the Guardians of Lore, Chapter 11, For Fairy Eyes Only. Why didn't you tell us that right away? So I asked as he stood up. You did not ask, replied Tyrant, still seated. I also didn't ask to be flown here to hang out inside a cloud with a pointy-eared jerk. But here I am, so I shouted. Tyrant stood up too. But as a fairy, it didn't have the same dramatic effect. Swai, let's just calm down, I said to him. They're trying to help us. They're the whole reason we're in a mess. Swai said gruffly. How do we even know we belong here? Swai had made a pretty good point. It seemed that Reem was only interested in us because Deli was, and she still hadn't shown us any evidence that either Swai or I was the hero. For a moment, I imagined that maybe everything was a mistake, and that we might be able to end this all and go home. The thought didn't make me sad, but it didn't make me happy either. I believe we can answer that, said Deli from my shoulder. As she hopped onto the table in front of Tyrant, she spoke only to him. It's time to show them, she asserted. Tyrant's face showed me that he wasn't thrilled about the idea. He wore the same expression that I had when my mom insisted that I do my homework right when I got home. I knew that she was right, and that it wasn't her fault she was right, but I still didn't like it. Tyrant raised one of his pink fluorescent wings and motioned some fairies over, using it like an arm. 4 fairies came flying in from the side of the courtyard, opposite from where we entered. They were carrying a large, dark brown book. These fairies had on a kind of medieval armor made from the same glass as the chairs and tables. The book they were carrying was thicker than a dictionary and wider. It was the kind of book that Swai would have openly protested if we had been assigned to read it for our class. He once protested that making kids read anything over 100 pages were technically illegal, but he never found the proof to support it. Despite the size, it still seemed that the book was heavier than it looked, since the fairies were out of breath by the time they put it down on the table. Tyrant shooed them away with his wing, and they disappeared straight up and out of the courtyard. When the fairies left, Swai and I stood up at the same time to inspect the book. It was a dusty, ran-down book, but something about it was beautiful. There were no words on the cover, and it was hard to say whether they had rubbed off or they were just never there at all. A buckle with a lock ran horizontally across, made of the strange yellowish gold that I now knew. Stone gold? I asked. Yes, said Tyrant. Only a magic pen may write in the Book of Lore, but it does not hurt to be safe. Why would anybody want to mess with the book? Asked Swai. The Book of Lore chronicles every fairy tale throughout history. Changing them would change the fate of the world, answered Tyrant indignantly. Swai didn't bother responding this time. All 4 of us gathered closer, hovering over the book as Tyrant held up his shiny pen. Without a word, he turned it over, placed the crown top inside the stone gold, locked and turned it. The buckle surrendered, opening up with a low hiss. I thought the pages smelled like pine trees, but didn't say it out loud. Tyrant began flipping through the book, and it was hard to see the words. Whenever I did catch a glimpse, the writing was hard to focus on at first, but then got more clear. The words were written in fancy, old-looking letters. Swai was poking his head even closer. It's in English, he said. I thought it might be in fairy or elvish, or something weird like that. Tyrant glanced at Dali, then back to the page. It was obvious from his voice that he was agitated. It's not in English. The fairy tales in the book of lore appear in the first language of whomever is reading it, he said. That's English, said Swy, pointing at the book. Swy, to you it is in English, but to someone else it may be in French or German, said Deli. If it was in French or German, I wouldn't be able to read it, Swy explained simply, so that's how I know it's in English. Tyrant let out an unfairy-like grunt and continued flipping through the pages while he spoke. The characters in these stories had their fake seal by the outcomes written here. But there is one fairy tale that remains unique, Reem's first fairy tale. He was part of a different fairy tale? I asked with surprise. That seemed like a big deal to me. Yes, Tyrant replied. When a hero or heroine defeats a villain, their story and their fate are sealed within this book. All the wrath of those who were defeated, all of the magic is confined within the book so that they may never use it against the world again. And every villain inside the book of lore was defeated, save one. Reem, I said. Yes, replied Deli. Instead of defeat, his tale ended with an escape. That is why he was able to hold on to his rail. He was injured, pierced with stone gold to be exact, Tyrant said as he slowed his page turning. And once stone gold pierces you, it may never be removed or covered. This is why Reem always has a piece of stone gold visible, regardless of his disguise. But nobody has explained yet why he's after us, said Swy. We didn't do anything to him. You're not a patient kid. Are you, Swy? Asked Tyrant in a half question. And you don't own a bookmark, rebutted Swy, not at all in the form of a question. Tyrant turned one last page, then covered it with his fairy hand, unleashing a slew of pink sparkles that shot out to conceal the center. He spoke to me. This is your fairy tale, and this is the reason that Reem is after you. It may be the last fairy tale that is ever written. All the fairy tales that came before it and all the creatures inside of them are at stake. It offers Reem and the forces of Ryle a chance to change their fate. But why are you calling it mine? I asked shyly. Deli looked up at me. Because you are the hero, she replied. Tyrant moved his head, and the sparkles flew away, written on the page in 1,000 languages, but in English, to me, was the title, The Boy and the Flying Bat, and underneath it, there was a small drawing. It was the same one I had been drawing when I noticed a frog staring at me from behind a window.